Hey, welcome into Inside the Hedges. Matthew Bartlett here, Director, Managing Editor of the Roost, as always with Taylor McHargue, your former Rice football quarterback who has some experience beating up on the Marshall Thundering Herd. And we're going to have a fun show today talking about that, aren't we, Taylor?
We absolutely are. That was an awesome win for the Owls, and excited that hopefully we get another game coming up this weekend. We'll see.
Yeah, that's the plan as far as we know. And I guess we'll start up top with the fun stuff. Picking a stat is going to be hard to do. First shutout for Rice over a ranked opponent since 1960. That was one of my favorite ones. First time Rice has being the ranked opponent since 1997. That was number 21 BYU. This was number 15 Marshall. First time that they had ever been shut out in that stadium, their home field. Uh, I gotta be honest. We thought they had a chance. I did not see that coming. What went right? Just everything, right? Anything
Well,
specific?
everything on the defensive side of the ball for sure, and the offense did their part. But this was, first and foremost, this was about the defense. Anytime you create 5 turnovers of any variety, much less, 5 interceptions, one of which was a pick six, you're going to have a chance against anybody. And I think Rice's defense did such a nice job getting in Grant Wells' face early and often in the game. They huddled. They had crowded the line of scrimmage. There were a lot of bodies just close to the line of scrimmage and getting after him. And regardless, pass or run, you saw gang tackling. You saw guys that were flying with the ball. And then they capitalized when there was opportunities to make some interceptions. And then also on the offensive side of the ball, I thought Giovanni stepped up and did exactly what was called of him, right? If you're the backup stepping into a moment like that, it's really important. If you're a young guy like that, just don't do anything that gets you beat, especially in a game like that where your defense is playing so well. And he did a really nice job of that, made a couple of really nice throws. The fumble going in, I thought that should have been a touchdown. So this game's almost a 27 or 30-0 game. So great team win all the way around. And Coach Bloomgren's talked about, look, we're trying to learn how to win. We're trying to figure out how to win. And this is the type of game that helps you do that.
Yeah, there was a lot there, and there was a couple interesting plays that we did want to get to, especially we want to start on the defense. I thought it was only fitting Naeem Smith, his first game back this year, has that pick six that at that point you're looking at a game, I believe it was 13-0, and Rice had been in control. But again, we've seen it's a 2-score game, just like North Texas. You get one touchdown on the other side, and all of a sudden it has a different feel. How fitting was it that it was Naeem who comes back and has that play? And as you're watching that game, where did your mind go as soon as he walks across that end zone?
Yeah, well, it was a huge play by him, and it was timely, both in his coming back into the season, but also at that point in the game. As a fan, you're sitting there watching, and you're thinking, okay, at some point Marshall's going to wake up. You kept kind of waiting on them to get a sustained drive, get down the field, and get some points on the board. And that was the first moment that it really felt like that might not happen. This might be a lopsided, one-sided victory that it ended up being. And then what did I think? It feels like, again, that's the piece, that's the momentum that you have to have those to build on. And a win against that Marshall team, if you were to close out with a win against UAB, then there's the potential Rice ends up in a bowl game. And now you've really got that momentum rolling where you get into the offseason and these guys are going to be hungry and ready to go for 2021.
Yeah, we've kind of, tossed it back and forth as we've gone through recording these, game previews for games that haven't happened and recaps for games that Rice has gotten in. We were trying to kind of figure out, like, how do you evaluate this season? A bowl game was the expectation when we thought they were going to play 12, and some of those were going to be in, Lamar and Army and UTEP, but those games didn't happen. Now, is it, not to get too big picture, but is this the kind of win that you can kind of point to and say, there's a lot of work in progresses. Obviously, we'd like to have everybody healthy, but Rice is kind of, to agree, gotten to the point that we needed them to get to this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back in college football specifically, this happens for a lot of teams where you have a nucleus of young guys that's trying to figure out how to win. and they've played a bunch of football as freshmen and sophomores. And it takes a moment like this that creates momentum where they get that belief that these one-score games that Rice has been losing the last couple of years, you got to have a win like this in order to kind of get over the hump. And that doesn't ensure that, okay, every close game here on out, you're going to win, but it changes the mentality, changes the mindset. And I do think they're trending in the right direction. There's a ton of this team. A lot of the pieces are going to be back next year. We'll see what happens with these fifth years that would have the opportunity to come back. It remains to be seen what Rice is going to do about that. But this was a huge win in all facets for this season, for the potential to get into a bowl game, and for momentum moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a fun nugget to tuck away in the back of brain for everybody watching and following along. Rice is 5-7, and they're or 5-2 rather. Let me get that right. Rice is 5-2 in their last 7 games, which is would be a pretty good start to a full 12-game season. But it's been kind of ad hoc. But we do. There was a couple other things that, as a former player, I wanted to get your take on, and one of those was the fake punt that Rice runs in the first half. So Rice is winning at that point, and you can kind of feel that Rice has been aggressive. They're going to try and push the envelope. It's 4th down, and Charlie Mendez rears back to throw the ball, falls incomplete. No flags on the field, and Mike Bloomgren gets cherry red in the face, and the officials huddle. And what seems like forever later, they end up throwing a flag. Is that the latest flag that you've ever seen thrown in a college football game?
It is. I think I tweeted that verbatim that I had never seen a group of refs get together. They don't call it on the field. They huddle together. They talk for, like you said, feels like forever. And then they throw the flag. And look, I'm as big a Rice fan as there is out there. I actually thought that there looked like some miscommunication. Looked like the receiver wasn't looking back for the ball at all. So I was shocked to see it go that direction because I thought the call was going to stand. Look, there's no pass interference, but obviously very lucky that it did go that way and extend the drive. But that was the latest I had seen a flag like that called.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting during Bloomgren's media availability this week. I asked him about it, and he said that they had prepped the officials before the game. They said, here's kind of the situation. Here's what we're going to run. Is this still the rule? Like, are we going to get this flag? And they kind of, were all on the same page beforehand. And Bloomgren was just yelling at him at the point. He's like, isn't this exactly what we talked about? And
yeah. And one other thing, everybody out there that noticed, there were 2 motion penalties in the game where it looked like the refs were not on the same page. We would bring somebody in motion, and it was usually the fullback right before the snap. One of the times it looked like they were moving forward, but the second one, it did not. The second one looked like it was lateral motion and it was legal. And that felt like one of those that, Coach Bloomgren and his staff went over this with the officials ahead of the game. I thought they missed that one. It felt like the referees were almost confused by what that late motion was. So you had one with the punt go Rice's way, and then with the motion, it did not both times. So it all comes out in the wash, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, and I was thinking about, leading up to this game, when you're going to beat a team like Marshall, because we've seen spurts of play this good, especially on defense from Rice so far, but we haven't seen them in maybe since you were playing in the championship game, have a win of this caliber over a team that was this good. When you're playing someone that you're the underdog, you got to punch up. You have to execute at a really high level, which I think Rice did, and you have to be lucky, and you got to get some breaks. And I think, whether that the flag on the punt or a couple other situations in the game early, letting Rice get out to that 10-0 lead at the break, that was huge in itself. So that by the time you got to the second half, it really felt like, man, we get one more play. The guys on the sideline thinking that they could bust it open, and that's what they did. So a little bit of good and a little bit about being in the right place at the right time.
It is, but part of luck in any sport, and especially football, is putting yourself in the right situation. You talk about Naeem's interception. Part of that was he had his eyes back on the quarterback, which he, in that coverage, he was doing exactly right. The receiver turns it into a go, and it looks like Grant Wells thought he was going to break that off. and you're in the right place, right time. Is it a little bit of luck for Naeem that he threw it straight to him? Sure, but you still got to make the play. And there were a few things like that, but ultimately, I think it came down to 5 turnovers to 1, and Giovanni did a great job managing that offense, getting Rice down the field and converting. Again, one score away from almost having 30 points on the board against a defense that held App State to 7 points early in the year. So, regardless of how you look at it, this was a great team win for Rice.
Yeah, and then one guy that I know we haven't mentioned yet because for most of his Rice career, he's actually been with the defense and a special teams guy. But I did want to mention him. Ari Broussard had 19 carries for 62 yards. Doesn't sound like a lot just from the box score, but Kalen Griffin, explosive freshman, has come in, a little bit of ball security and the defense getting to him and poking things out. Fortunately, he was able to fall on him, but they put Ari in there in the second half, former walk-on, former linebacker, and just kind of put it in his gut and said, get 4 yards and move the chains. And does it say something that a win this big, one of the guys salting it away as a former walk-on? I feel like that just fits the toughness mindset of this program.
Yeah, the next man up mentality. And Rice has kind of always had that. I feel like Rice is known for having a handful of those walk-ons that rise up and earn scholarships and are have an impact role. And Broussard had a great game, 19 carries, 62 yards. They did lean on him, especially in the second half. I thought Jake Bailey had a really nice game. And again, Giovanni, we talk about only 86 yards passing. We only had 14 attempts, right? So 10 of 14, very efficient. They were not letting him stretch the ball down the field too much. We'll get to UAB in a little bit. They're going to have to open it up a little bit if Giovanni's back in at quarterback again this week. But 127 yards on the ground, that's something that we talked about. Marshall very rarely gives up over 100 yards rushing. So Rice did what it needed to do on the offensive side of the ball to win. But like we said at the top, it really starts and ends with the defense in this one.
Yeah, and we can try. We always like to close things out with a game ball or two. Any one person in particular that you think earned it this week?
I mean, is Blaze too cliche? I feel like you could probably give it to Blaze every game that he plays. But he earned it. He's all over the field. His interception was huge, but he's in the right place at the right time. He's the heart and soul of that defense. And what I love about Blaze is when you hear him in his post game or when we do our pre-production calls with him, he loves to talk about his teammates. He tries to get, we ask him a question that's directly about him. He figures out a way to work in a name, one of the guys on the defense with him, and compliment the defensive line when they're getting pressure. And he's the ultimate team guy. And you can't say enough about it. If you could have 22 guys just like him starting, you'd win a lot of games. So again, it's probably a cliche, but I'll go with Blaze Aldridge.
Yeah, I take that, and then I will shout out one of the guys he mentioned in post game presser. He went ahead and mentioned DeBraylon Carroll and his work up in the interior. I'll give it to DeBraylon and then Elijah Garcia. The impact that the defensive line had on that game, especially early, like Blaze was great, but the fact that there was never a pocket at all for Grant Wells to throw from and to feel comfortable, I think that was just as big at turning the tide in this game and putting him off balance and off script as anything else. So, like you said, we could give it to the whole defense. I'm going to give it to those two big guys in the middle. There was one play, I think, that it was a race between DeBraylon and Blaze. Both broke through. I think it was the last third down there in the fourth quarter. They both broke through the line at the same time, and it was a foot race as to who was going to get the sack.
Right.
I think they credited it to Braylon.
Yeah, it really was the whole front seven getting after Grant Wells early and often. And you could tell that was the game plan, was to try and make him play like a freshman. And he did. This was the first time that we saw Grant Wells really look human in an otherwise pretty outstanding freshman year.
Yeah, and add it to the list. Rice has fared really well. We saw them, literally beat up and get out Jack Abraham at Southern Miss earlier this year. But the past couple of years, this Rice defense has hung tough and contained, for the most part, a lot of really good passers that they've played against. So it makes it a lot easier when you only have to score Well, I guess in this case, Rice only needed a safety, and they would have won, right? 2-0.
Yep,
We won't
absolutely.
get there. We'll take 20. Anything we can get, and I guess that wraps up that game. That was fun. If you want the extended version, we talked about it in the Roost podcast this week. We did an emergency podcast right after the game because we had to talk further. So if you want an hour of breaking down blow by blow all that fun, go ahead and check that out. But we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to the UAB game. And I guess first order of business is Rice announced this week that there's going to be a general admission, or at least fans in the stands at some point, which, senior day, hopefully the last game that some of these guys are going to get to play at Rice Stadium with their families and folks at the field. It's going to be nice. And I think, we're hoping that Rice gets to that point and we can see those. So did want to mention that, and then want to get a look ahead at UAB. First, we want to talk about the current state of the Blazers, and that is they, because of positive tests and contact tracing, you and I might have to suit up and play linebacker. They're running pretty thin if they're going to get this game in.
They are, and just based on the press conference earlier today, it sounds like they're going to do everything they can to get this game played. And, kind of regardless of, Coach Clark said, hey, there's no minimum. I actually did not realize this until today. There is no scholarship minimum in Conference USA, meaning if they can suit up enough guys to field a team, that any team in Conference USA can play. And it sounds like Coach Clark made it clear we're going. They tried to shuffle some things around. They wanted to see if they could push the Rice game back a couple days to get some extra people healthy, and then subsequently push the conference championship back as well. But that didn't happen. Conference USA said no dice. So Coach Clark said, look, we're coming, and not sure how many guys we're going to have. And we're going to find out on Friday maybe who their starting lineup is for a lot of these players and who they're actually bringing. But you saw what happened with UTEP last week. Who knows what's going to happen once they get here? And I imagine there's going to be another round of testing. So don't be surprised if on game day you see some people out there. I'll be on the call. My board, Chuck Poole, sent me a text earlier today, and he's like, write your boards in pencil because there's a decent chance you're going to be changing a few of these names. So it's going to be a wild next few days trying to actually get this game started.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, if this had been, an October game or something like that, where you got a couple weeks, you got an open date later in the season, maybe we push things back. But like you mentioned, UAB, if they win, they're going to the conference championship game as the West representative. And, you can't push that game back because there's a Conference USA eligible bowl game on the same day as the conference championship, because the championship games have been pushed back, but the bowl games really haven't. So, UAB wants to play this game, and Rice, if Rice wins, they're going to be in position, I guess, the third best team in the West after UTSA and Louisiana Tech to get a shot at going to a bowl themselves. And that would be a heck of a season, all things considered. So both teams want to play. It's just whether or not we can do this safely. That's the goal. So stay tuned. As of, we're going live right now and the game is on. And I saw Evan Dudley, who does a great job for AL.com covering UAB. He mentioned that earlier this afternoon that UAB is down 25 players right now, and that includes about 12 starters and guys that play major minutes. So, I mean, even if you include special teams, you're talking like, 24, 25 starters? It would be pretty tough to be playing without half of those guys.
Yeah, it's going to be – if these numbers hold true, this will be the most unique game maybe ever since I've been around Rice, because you're going to see guys potentially playing positions that they don't normally play, potentially playing both ways, depending on the position. You might see DBs having to play receiver or vice versa. We really don't know what to expect quite yet. You hope for UAB's sake that they get their guys healthy, but like you mentioned, for both sides, they want to get this game played. For UAB, it's paramount because if they win, they're in for the Conference USA Championship for the third. They'll represent the West for the third year in a row. And if you're Rice, this is an opportunity to be in a bowl game for the first time since 2014. So you want to get this one in as well. So, like you mentioned, they're 550 on Wednesday, still playing as of now. Hopefully, it stays that way.
Yeah, and I mean, it was interesting. Rice ended up being down to, I think, 2 scholarship wide receivers. Bloomgren said last week. Marshall played last week without their starting 2 offensive tackles, and I think another one got hurt during the game. So everybody is playing beat up at this point. Rice just went in and played without a quarterback, wide receiver, and starting running back. So it's going to be interesting, and it kind of feels like we're limping to the finish. But if we can get this on, it's going to be fun. So we don't know who is going to be on the field, but from what we have seen of UAB, I guess it's been a couple weeks since they've played, but this season and over the past couple years, this is kind of like Marshall. If we're starting on defense, they're going to be physical, whoever's on the field, and they're going to try and punch you in the mouth. And that's going to be the task for whoever lines up at quarterback for Rice, is finding a way to score on a front that is going to try and be out physical and out tough you.
They are, and UAB on the defensive side of the ball is one of the better pass defenses in the conference. They're 12th nationally in their pass defense. They've held several of their opponents already this year under 200 yards passing. So for Rice, regardless of who's at quarterback, Giovanni or Mike Collins, going to have to figure out a way to get the pass game going early, because they know Rice's strength is to run the ball. You got to imagine on their defensive side of the ball, they're going to crowd the line of scrimmage and say, okay, beat us over the top. You're going to have to try and get the ball downfield. We know big win last week, but you threw for less than 100 yards against Marshall. We're going to try and make you do the same thing this week. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they've had they've mixed up their quarterbacks a couple different times, had some turnover issues in that Louisiana Tech game and made a change. But it really is, the Spencer Brown show at running back, for the most part, he's 138 yards from 4,000 yards for his career rushing. So it really revolves around him on the offensive side of the ball. They do some nice things in the pass game, but have had some turnover issues. So this is assuming that we're going to see sort of the usual suspects for them. They might come out there with a totally different lineup and guys that we haven't seen play at all this year. So we'll see what happens. But to this point, they pride themselves on running the ball and taking care of the football. Aside from, they've had a couple issues at the quarterback position with turnovers in a couple games, specifically Louisiana Tech. They should have won that game, ended up losing late. It went to overtime. But this is a talented UAB team that, when they're healthy and rolling, can play with really anybody in this conference.
Yeah, and what we do know, Austin Watkins, junior wide receiver, he opted out this week from the rest of the season, so he won't be on the field. We don't know about the rest of the roster, like you said, but something Rice learned the hard way last year is, like you mentioned, this is a team that is going to be physical and run the football. Spencer Brown, I don't believe it was the first play or the second play. It was the very beginning of the game last year in Birmingham. He went out with an injury, and we saw Lucius Stanley and a couple other guys step up and run wild against a Rice defense that had been pretty stout. That was an eye opener there, that they could lose their all conference caliber back and keep running. So Dwayne McBride is a freshman running back who stepped up. They have a stable there that if they have one of those guys available, that's where it's going to have to start for the Rice defense, who did a really good job of keeping Brendan Knox contained. He only ran for 76 yards, 3.8 a carry. Marshall's, all conference running back there. And so that's a way to set you up for success. If you can hold the running game that UAB is going to rely on somewhat neutral, then that opens up an entirely different situation. And in many ways, we're kind of hoping that Rice can put together a similar plan and a similar game script to what we saw last week. You kind of think that these are two opponents that you're kind of going to attack in a similar fashion. Is that fair?
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's both sides, both offenses have similar strengths, and really both defenses have fairly similar strengths. I would say UAB's secondary might be a little ahead of where Rice's is right now, but just to provide a little more context for Spencer Brown and this offense at running back, there's only one player in the country that has more career rushing yards than Spencer Brown, and that's Travis Etienne at Clemson. So anytime your name is mentioned with a Travis Etienne for anything, you're doing something right. So this is a guy, they're going to try and feature him early and often. They actually had, it wasn't him, they had a different running back with a 75-yard touchdown against Louisiana Tech. So they run the ball really well. It's obviously different from Rice. They're not under they're not on two tight end formations with a fullback. They're spread out. They do a lot of, they're out of the, we call it the J, but the pistol formation, where they get him going downhill in a hurry, and then they'll run quite a bit of bootleg and play action off of that play action fake out of the pistol. But again, on offense, it really does start and stop with Spencer Brown.
Yeah, it's like we said, go ahead and make sure you are paying attention this week, at least over on the Roost. We'll be kind of keeping tabs with who's in and who's out and what's going on. It's going to be, in so many ways, the kind of the encapsulation of 2020 to this point. I believe we're batting at somewhere around, about a third of Conference USA games that have been canceled before they've been played after getting scheduled. So we are optimistic. Like we said, if UAB, we're just going to throw back. We just had a first since the 1960s, right? UAB is going to roll off the bus with 13 guys and say, we got this. And they're going to be tough.
Yeah, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but hopefully for both of these teams, we can get this game in.
Yeah, so we'll see, and then we wait for this game, and we'll see what happens next. And, who knows? Hopefully a bowl game for Rice, should they be able to close this one out. Those are both the possible bowls that Rice has are all, mid-December, so we could be back here talking about more football before we know it. I certainly hope that would be the case. That would be a lot of fun for us. So we'll see what happens. Anything else we need to get to before we sign off?
No, hopefully this one happens like you mentioned, and really was a huge win for Rice last week. I hope people realize that was a special performance by that team, and I hope that they capture that and ride this momentum and build on that, because that was a really big win for Rice.
Yeah, you want some goosebumps. The Rice creative and marketing design team, they do an awesome job, and they put together Caroline Hall and her team a montage that was rather epic, going back and reliving that game. So it was fun. Go ahead and give that a watch. For the time being, go check out Taylor on Twitter. Give him a follow. T McHargue 16. He'll be on the call. I'll be at the game watching with y'all, but in the meantime, patreon.com/@theroost. Go ahead and subscribe. We're almost up to 100 followers this season, so it'd be pretty cool if we can get there. We got early signing day coming up as well. As always, follow us on @theroost social medias as well. We got a lot more coming, and hopefully one more football game. So thank you guys as always. I know we've had a lot of fun talking Rice football with you guys. Always better after a win, and hopefully we get one more this Saturday. But until then, see y'all. Rice, fight.